Good morning, Seal Beach. Are we awake yet? I was out on my walk yesterday morning, and I walk most mornings, and Monday through Friday when I walk, it's just crazy out there. You know, and then yesterday morning I went out a little bit earlier because I thought I'd really like it to be a little quiet, and then I remembered it was Saturday. And it was quiet because everyone is just kind of out of that Monday through Friday kind of groove, right? And into something slower. And I was thinking, wow, that was so beautiful. That's what it felt like. So beautiful music. Thank you for that. It's really lovely. I'd like to start with a story. It was the coldest winter ever, and so cold that many animals froze to death. In an effort to save themselves from this icy fate, the porcupines decided to gather together to fend off the chill. You know how porcupines are, right? They huddled close together, covered and protected from the elements and warmed by their collective body heat. But their prickly quills proved to be a bit of a problem in close proximity. They poked and they stabbed at one another, wounding their closest companions. The warmth was wonderful, but the mutual needling became increasingly uncomfortable, and eventually they began to distance themselves from one another, scattering in the forest only to end up alone and frozen. Many died. It soon became clear that they would have to choose between solitary deaths in the frigid wilderness and the discomfort of being needled by their companions when they banded together. So wisely, they decided to return to the huddle. They learned to live with the little wounds caused by the close relationship with their fellows in order to benefit from this collective heat that they generated as a group. And in this way, they were able to survive. This is called the parable of the porcupine. You know, part of what water exemplifies, which is there's a flow that water just demonstrates. Being in the flow does not mean we won't get hurt. Being in the flow does not mean we will not poke or be poked. We all hurt each other from time to time, and it's an inevitable part of being in relationship and community. But in the end, being together is really the only way as a humanity that not only can we survive, but thrive. Nature is a great mirror and a great teacher to us. And why? And we really think about, why is nature such a great teacher? I think so often, I think even through the pandemic, that point of retreating, that we find ourselves walking this journey even more alone, probably, to some extent. And nature does that too. And there are examples of nature in which there are species that do not work together. And they also have shorter lifespans, and they also struggle more for survival. One of the most beautiful creatures out there that does that is the hummingbird. It's beautiful. We have about 8 hummingbirds flying around in our backyard right now. We've provided plenty of food. And there's plenty of flowers in our backyard for them to enjoy, but they really struggle because there's a concern that there's not enough. That's what they do. So they fight each other off. And I hear them. It's almost dangerous to be in my backyard sometimes because they're zooming around over our heads. So everything in nature contains all the powers of nature, and everything is made of one hidden stuff. Even the hummingbirds, though they're not very conscious of the fact that there is abundance, although I would probably react similarly to them in the face of one of the most significant droughts we've had in many years. It was mentioned earlier a little bit about I have a background in water. Boy, do I. I used to work for the largest water district in the world. before I retired and became a minister. And I worked in all different facets for it was the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. I'm sure many of you have heard of them. Yes, I get that too. You should see when I used to go to San Diego, it wasn't just laughs, it was usually booze. But part of that is interesting because water is such an interesting resource that is often treated like a commodity. We need water to survive as a species. We also use it as a commodity. When I was at the Metropolitan Water District, some of the roles I had was to speak about water and to speak about how important it was, because so often we forget. In fact, I would say most of the time we do, and it goes just like this. In the morning you turn on the tap and the water comes out and we don't think twice about it. We don't think about how it actually got there. And at times when there's a drought, we start to think about it, but even so, we still use it, this amazing resource. And there is plenty of this resource, but there is not plenty in our area. Take the county of San Diego, 85% of their water is imported. 85%. In this area, it drops significantly, but there's still a huge amount of water that's imported into our area because of growth. We take water off the Colorado River. We take water off the North Delta. When I say metropolitan up in San Francisco, the boos get louder because we're stealing water from the north, right? It's almost like we're acting like hummingbirds again, right? There's an intelligent design to our world and our universe. And our planet has such intelligent design, and we're one of those organisms, one of those creatures on the planet. And what's interesting about our planet is there are three things in our planet. By the way, I'm not a biologist or a chemist, so any of you are, you can correct me later. There are three compounds that we survive by: hydrogen, oxygen. Thank you. It's right here. Hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. Carbon is probably the most significant. Oxygen is something that we cannot live without. Hydrogen is part of what makes up almost everything on our planet. Carbon is kind of that key building block. It is in both water and oxygen. Carbon can form 65 million different carbon compounds. It is prolific. No other element can substitute for carbon, and it is because of carbon that we have complex life on this planet. It is that simple. And it's not just that we have carbon, but we have this amazing balance of compounds, nuclear energy, a host of things that allow us as humans and other creatures to actually walk the planet, to evolve. Leonardo da Vinci said that the driving force of all nature is water. So I'm going to ask a quick question. What percentage of us is water?
78.
Anyone else want to take a gander at that one? 75 to 78%. What's interesting, if I had a prize, Eileen, I'd throw it right at you. What's interesting about that is our eyes are 95% water. 95% water. So water has some interesting characteristics. So I want you to just think about this from a standpoint of what does it act like that makes you think of from a spiritual standpoint. It is the universal solvent. It can dissolve almost anything. There is nothing like it. It is less chemically reactive than any other chemical. It has low viscosity and thickness. Water allows us to be more resistant to outside forces. That's what water does. It stabilizes our temperature. It stabilizes the temperature of the planet. It absorbs body heat the best of anything. Its evaporative cooling is the best way for us to cool anything in anywhere. Our tectonic cycle recycles minerals, which includes water. Water, by the way, cannot be contaminated itself. It can have contamination in it, but it cannot be contaminated. You filter out water. The water molecule itself does not get contaminated. It just sits in contamination. That's what makes it so interesting. It remains pure at its core. Based on our design, it is an essential and integral part of who we are. The Tao says this: nothing in the world is as soft and yielding as water. Yes, yet for dissolving the hard and inflexible, nothing can surpass it. It's intelligent. It has a consciousness. So here's another little trivia point. I'm waiting for Eileen C. Davis to shout this out correctly. It must have been from being a nun, right, Eileen? I think so. So how many gallons of water are on the planet? Do you know? I know. 326 million trillion gallons. 72% of the Earth's surface is covered by water. 97% of it is in the ocean. We need that much water to keep our climate cool enough for us and many creatures to survive. Without it, we would just burn up. So this is an interesting fact, and I say this because this talks about the sacred nature of water. So I want you to think about how important water is, how necessary it is for our survival. And I want you to hear how many gallons of water it takes to produce something. One of the most water-consuming products out there in agriculture is almonds. It takes 80 gallons to produce 1 ounce of almonds. I stopped drinking almond water some time ago, by the way. It takes 616 gallons of water to make a 4-ounce hamburger. It gets worse. A beefsteak takes 1,232 gallons to make one beefsteak. An 8-ounce chicken, 330 gallons. Now let's talk about broccoli. Takes 11 gallons to produce 2 cups of broccoli. Being conscious about such a sacred resource puts a lot in perspective. So when you think about it from a spiritual standpoint, water, what does water feel like in the world, in our spiritual world? What does water act like? Peace. Flow. Let me give you one little hint for an even bigger idea. In, through, and as. God. There's that macro design of water that really has this power as a metaphor to be a reminder. It's used in sacred ceremony, baptisms, christenings. We do it all the time. I do things like in the morning when I get up, right when I get up. I've done this since I was a child, is to take water and splash my face as a way to just start the day. It has properties that, in its consciousness, and I'm sure you've heard of a scientific study done by a Japanese scientist where he actually talked to water, Mateo. And what he found is that whatever he spoke to these molecules of water, they actually took on the energy of what was being spoken. When it was angry and hateful, these crystals that were formed as a result of what he was speaking, the water took on that sort of energy, and those crystals were created based on that. When he spoke love, the water took on that same magnificence of what love is. So just for a moment, when you think of that, imagine how we speak to ourselves and each other and the power. Because if water has a consciousness, well, then doesn't everything? Doesn't everything? I know last week when Reverend Guy was here, he talked about his punchline he delivered right up the front. Somebody helped him with that punchline phrase, which is that we are all sacred, that we are children of the Most High. I'd like to add to that, which is everything is. And so often, as we operate in the world, I think there's a limit there. We limit the idea that some are sacred, some are not. Sometimes I'm sacred, sometimes I'm not. Some things aren't sacred, maybe some people, some plants, some animals. And do we use what's on our earth from a standpoint of how sacred everything is? How there's a consciousness to everything on the planet? Probably not. Not even. I mean, I don't do that all the time. I do that when I'm sitting and I'm thinking about this. I probably think more about water because I had a career in it. I'm always alarmed by how we use it. I'm always alarmed by how we treat it and how unconscious we are about it. Because I kind of believe that how we do one thing, we do everything. And when I think about the theme of this month, which is all about our relationship to nature, nature we're part of. And I think we remove ourselves from nature, separating ourselves as if somehow we're not part of what is so amazing and so amazing and beautiful on this planet. But something's happening. And without argument or disagreement, it's hotter. This is the hottest summer I've ever had. We're in a drought that we haven't seen in probably since I was a child. I think in the 60s, going into the 70s, there was a drought. I remember it was 5-minute showers. It was a host of things that were happening. When you look at where our water supply comes from, Lake Mead, it is so far down that there's such cause for alarm, but yet we're still using it as if there isn't. And by the way, there's plenty of water on the planet. It's just not here. And there's a lot of science around bringing water in from the ocean, but that also has its environmental complications. Again, we have to be conscious of what we do and how we affect. And in order to do that, we have to step outside of being just consumers and look at how we can be stewards. Because if we look at our world from a consumer standpoint, then we're not really seeing how we affect the planet. Period. Ken Wilber said the different levels of the spectrum are something like the various waves of the ocean. Some waves near the shore are strong and powerful, while others farther out are weaker and less powerful. Unity consciousness, however, is not so much a particular wave as it is the water itself. And there is no boundary, no difference, no separation between water and any of the waves that is. The water is equally present in all waves. That is us, too. We are equally present, just as water is equally present in us and everything. It is up to us. It is up to us to develop and focus our time and attention on being conscious about how we are on our planet. The Buddha said, develop a mind that is vast like the water, where experiences both pleasant and unpleasant can appear and disappear without conflict, struggle, or harm. Rest in a mind like vast water. Another example of how water presents itself as this beautiful metaphor to us. Water is very conscious. It flows. It doesn't necessarily decide where to flow. It flows. And it flows and it goes and it moves. And with it, it brings both devastation, destruction, and abundance. It does all of that, much like we do. But it's conscious. This design of what water is and as present in our universe, in our world most particularly. Presence is what I bring and what I can bring, like water, to how I am in the world. Being present to how I am flowing or not flowing, which is, am I fighting? What Pam mentioned. Am I fighting or am I in the flow? When I'm fighting, it's frustrating. I cannot really move in the world. I cannot really be with others if I'm fighting. But when I'm in a flow, I can allow things in and out. Just like water, I cannot be contaminated. But I can carry contamination in the form of beliefs, in the way I think, and how I am. Ernest Holmes says the best is like water. Water is good. It benefits all things and does not compete with them. It dwells in lowly places that all disdain. I'm going to read that again. It dwells in lowly places that all disdain. That is why it is so near to the Tao. This is Ernest Holmes, the founder. As water purifies itself by flowing, so our inner realization of the flow of life through us purifies the stagnant pools of our fears and doubts. What can we learn from it? Water causes destruction, loss of life, not because it does itself, but because of its powerful nature. But what's interesting about tsunamis, as far as destruction of what water can do, animals always sense something like that and go to high ground, just like we can do. More than 100 people a year in the U.S. die from rip currents and rip tides. Tens of thousands more are rescued by lifeguards. The power, or I should say, being in a rip current isn't about fighting it, fighting against it. It's about relaxing and resting in it until it passes and you're able to swim to shore. Water is the greatest example of allowing and patience. So I'm going to close with a quote from John Muir. And so you know John Muir and the wilderness that he explored, and how he felt about it is infinite in the capacity of what nature can provide to us. He said, when we contemplate the whole globe as one dewdrop, striped and dotted with continents and islands, flying through space with other stars, all singing and shining together as one, the whole universe appears as an infinite storm of beauty. So let us pray. So as we come here to this day, this beautiful day that we've called Sunday, this point in time, this divine appointment that we've come together in celebration of self, of community, of the universe, honoring that which is all sacred, that deep recognition. I know that I'm one with it, and each one here is as well. And those online, as we come together in whatever form of community, just holding this beautiful resource of water as an example of the gift and benefit that our universe provides us. It is not changing in its base form. It stays the same. It is untouched, just as we truly are. So I hold this as a beautiful example of the journey that we each have. So knowing the peace and abundance that is Seal Beach, I just call this time good. And so it is. Amen.